ChatGPT said. The first light of morning crept gently through the curtains. Spilling across the tiled floor of Keanu's kitchen like a quiet invitation, the house was still. No voices, no footsteps, only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional whisper of wind brushing past the window panes. He sat alone at the small wooden table, a simple ceramic cup in his hand. The steam from his coffee curling upward like a slow, thoughtful sigh. He didn't move much, just sat there, elbows resting on the table, one hand cradling the warm mug, the other slowly turning a pen between his fingers. His eyes, calm but distant, were fixed on a worn notebook lying open before him. The pages were filled with bullet points phrases, neatly printed in black ink, reminders of what he was expected to say later that morning. The usual stuff. Upcoming. Film. Creative process. Philanthropic efforts. A few safe personal insights about life and gratitude. Polished, practiced, predictable. He knew the rhythm by heart. But today, something didn't feel right. There was a weight behind his eyes, a quiet resistance in his chest that made it harder to breathe as freely as he usually did. It wasn't nerves. He'd done this too many times to be nervous. It was something else, something quieter, deeper. Not fear exactly, more like fatigue. Not the kind that sleep could fix, the kind that came from carrying too much of yourself. In silence for too long, he took a slow sip of coffee, the warmth grounding him for a moment, though it didn't ease the ache in his chest. The house around him, though familiar, felt distant today. The walls that usually held comfort and stillness now echoed with a strange tension, like they too were waiting for something he hadn't yet spoken. He looked down at the notebook again, scanned the first line. Talk about the process of choosing. The role. His pen hovered over it, then slowly crossed a faint line through the sentence. It's not because he didn't know what to say, because it didn't feel honest anymore. His thumb tapped the edge of the notebook. Once, twice, then still. He set the pen down gently and leaned back in the chair, gazing out the window. The sky was still a pale gray blue, the sun just beginning to stretch its light across the city. Beyond the trees, the world looked peaceful, detached, like it didn't care what words he chose or what image he presented. It just was. And in that simplicity, Keanu felt a quiet longing rise in his chest. A need not for recognition, not for approval, but for truth, real truth. Not the kind that made headlines, but the kind that lived in silence. In the parts of himself that no camera had ever seen. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the tension coiled there. The day ahead was already unfolding in his mind. Lights, questions, smiles, nods, carefully chosen answers. But what if just once he didn't filter it? What if he let people see not the actor, not the polished mask, but the person underneath? He didn't have the answer yet. The question lingered, quietly pulling at the edges of his thoughts. And for the first time in a long while, Keanu wasn't sure he could keep pretending. The sky had shifted. It wasn't just morning anymore. It was the kind of late sunrise that spilled gold across the rooftops, but couldn't quite warm the chill Keanu felt in his chest. Outside, birds chirped in soft bursts, but inside the house, everything was unnervingly quiet. It was the kind of silence that didn't comfort, it held attention, like the air was waiting for something to snap. Keanu stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, adjusting the collar of his dark shirt. It wasn't fancy, just clean, sharp, plain. Something that said approachable without trying too hard. He'd worn it before in interviews. It had become a kind of armor. Reliable, familiar, invisible. But today, the mirror didn't show the usual calm, composed man he'd trained himself to be. He stared longer than usual. It's maybe too long. His reflection looked tired. Not physically he'd. Slept okay? A solid 6 hours. But emotionally, it was like the weight of years sat behind his eyes, quiet and unresolved. It wasn't the kind of exhaustion you could see unless you were looking for it. Unless you really knew what to look for. A quiet knock pulled him from the moment. "Camera crew's here?" "Mr. Reeves," came a voice from just beyond the front door. Polite, professional, EMOTIONLESS. Keanu blinked once, then turned away from the mirror. "Coming," he replied, his voice low and steady, though it felt like a whisper spoken to a version of himself he hadn't seen in years. He opened the door slowly. The hallway beyond was suddenly alive with motion. 2 crew members stepped in, with tripods. Another followed with a boom mic. Lights, cords, monitor screens, all moving with the quick, mechanical grace of people who'd done this 100 times before. Their smiles were polite, their greetings well-rehearsed. But behind those smiles, Keanu saw it. The routine, the machine. He offered a soft good morning, then watched as his peaceful home began to change shape. His office was next. The shelves with old books, the framed photos of his sister, the strange little painting a fan once gave him that he couldn't bear to take down, it all faded into the background as cameras were mounted. Soft boxes were raised and cables ran like veins across the floor. A woman named Julia entered shortly. After, she was the journalist. Older than most interviewers he dealt with a calm presence and sharp, perceptive eyes. Her handshake was warm, strong, not showy. He liked her immediately. But there was something unsettling about her gaze. Like she wasn't just here to ask questions. She was here to see. "Thanks for inviting us into your space," she said with a slight smile, her voice low but genuine. "Thanks for coming," Keanu replied, his own smile thin, almost automatic. Julia stepped into the transformed room, glancing at the camera angles, then to the chair set across from his. "We'll start with your upcoming film," she said, "but then I'd like to go deeper, if you're comfortable with that." Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at the notebook still in his hand. Same talking points, same carefully phrased ideas, same shields. He looked up at her, then nodded. "Yeah, deeper's fine." But the word didn't feel fine. The crew moved quickly. Mics were tested, lights adjusted, makeup offered, declined. The whole setup buzzed with quiet intensity, like the room was on the edge of something, and all the while, that voice inside Keanu pressed harder against the silence. Don't say what they want. Say what matters. Then something strange happened. As he stepped away to pour himself another cup of coffee before the cameras rolled, he passed one of the assistant producers. The young man looked up and said, "By the way, the side cameras. Running already? We're just testing lighting angles." Keanu nodded, but didn't look back. He didn't know, couldn't have known that the side camera wasn't just recording test footage, it was recording everything. He sat down in the interview chair, the coffee warm in his hand again, but his body colder than before. The cameras hadn't even officially started, and yet already the air felt heavier, thicker, like it was holding something unsaid. Julia sat across from him, flipping through her notes, her tone still casual. "We'll start with the usual," she said again, "and then we'll see where it goes." Keanu gave a short, controlled smile. "Sounds good?" But inside, he was already drifting into old memories, unresolved moments, and a quiet, terrifying need to say something real. Not just for the audience, not even for Julia, but for himself. He had no idea that the truth he was about to speak, the truth didn't even mean to share, would soon be seen by millions. And once it was out, there would be no way to take it back. The lights were set. The room, once filled with personal softness, photographs, books, shadows of still mornings, had become a stage. Wires snaked across the floor like quiet threats. Camera lenses stood ready, silent but watchful, staring. With the patience of machines trained to wait for something human, Keanu sat in the interview chair. He leaned back slightly, the warm ceramic of his coffee cup resting in his hands. It was the last comfort left in the room. Everything else had shifted. Even the air felt tighter now. Not just because of the lighting or the equipment. It was the feeling that something bigger than anyone realized was about to break the surface. Across from him, Julia flipped to the first page of her notes. She looked calm, prepared, but her eyes, those dark, curious eyes, didn't match the tone of the questions in her hands. They weren't reading from the page, they were reading him. The cameraman raised a hand, rolling on primary. "Wide and tight angles live. Audio hot," The little red light blinked on. Julia glanced at the producer, who gave her a nod. Then she turned back to Keanu, microphone clipped to her collar, voice soft but clear. "So, Keanu," she began, "let's talk about the new film." Keanu smiled, the way he always did at the start of interviews. A slow, easy curve that looked practiced but not fake. It was the kind of smile he'd learned over years of press tours and red carpets. One that said, "I'm here, I'm present." "But you're not getting everything." He leaned forward slightly. "The film was demanding," he said. "Emotionally. Physically, but I loved the story. It asks big questions about loss and purpose, about who we pretend to be and who we actually are." Julia smiled. "Those themes seem to follow you, don't they?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Maybe I'm just always looking for the answers." The opening was safe, familiar, but something in the way he said that last sentence made Julia pause. She tapped her pen gently against her notebook. "Are you?" she asked. "Still looking for answers?" Keanu's smile faltered just for a breath. It was almost imperceptible, almost. "Yeah," he said, "always." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was loaded. Charged then. She changed direction. "You've been in the spotlight for decades, always known for being grounded, kind, private. Do you ever get tired of carrying that image?" Keanu looked down at his coffee. His fingers tightened slightly around the cup. "Sometimes," he said quietly. "Sometimes I wonder if the world loves who I am, or just who they've decided I am." Julia leaned forward. "Do you know the difference?" He looked up. Something in his face shifted like a door creaked open just slightly. "Some days I do," he said. "Other days it's all fog." Behind the cameras, the crew watched the monitor. Nothing had gone off script technically, but something felt different, like they were capturing a moment they hadn't expected, something they couldn't control. And then, without warning, Julia put the notepad down. "What would you say?" she asked softly if none of this was being recorded. The question hung in the air, powerful, dangerous, disarming. Keanu looked at her, eyes steady, and he almost answered. Almost, but instead he reached for his coffee again, sipped slowly, and let a thin smile return to his face. "Depends who's asking," he said. Julia didn't speak, just watched him. And in that quiet moment, the soft buzz of the backup camera could almost be heard still rolling. Still unnoticed, Keanu glanced at the overhead lights. They were hot. His skin felt tight beneath them. But it wasn't the heat making his pulse quicken. He felt it in his bones. Something was shifting inside him. A tide rising, slow but unstoppable. He thought of the notebook he left behind on the kitchen table, the line he crossed out earlier that morning. "Talk about the process of choosing the role." "No, not that, not today." He looked back at Julia, and for the first time in the entire morning, he wasn't acting. "Have you ever spent years being exactly what everyone wants?" "Yes." "And then one day you wake up and realize you've forgotten how to be what you need?" Julia blinked. Her answer didn't come because this wasn't in the notes, this wasn't part of the segment, this wasn't rehearsed. Keanu leaned back again, his breath slow but steady. He didn't break eye contact. And suddenly, the weight in. The room changed. The script was gone. Image cracked. Something real was coming. They all felt it. They just didn't know what it would cost. The cameras were still rolling. No one said it out loud. But everyone in the room felt it, like the hum before a lightning strike. A kind of stillness you only notice when something real is about to break through the surface. Julia sat frozen, the pen long forgotten, notebook untouched on her lap. Keanu's words lingered in the air between them like smoke that wouldn't fade. "Have you ever spent years being exactly what everyone wants? And then one day you wake up and realize you've forgotten how to be what you need?" No one expected him to say that. Not this early in the interview, not on the record, and certainly not without a carefully worded follow-up. But it hadn't been part of the script. None of it was. The silence stretched. Not awkward, just deep. Like the room had fallen into a quieter world where no one needed to pretend anymore. Keanu shifted slightly in his chair. His fingers tapped the side of his coffee cup, rhythm slow, thoughtful. Then, for the first time since the crew arrived, he exhaled with no performance behind it, No media training. Just breath. Raw. And unscripted. He leaned forward. You know, what people don't talk about, he said, voice softer now, but heavier somehow. They don't talk about the silence that follows the applause. Julia's eyebrows rose slightly. She said nothing, letting him continue. You walk off stage, or leave a set, or close the laptop after a fan meeting. And there's this moment right after it ends where it's just you. No lights, no faces, no clapping. Just ... silence. And in that silence, you realize no one really knows you. Not the version you keep giving them. His eyes dropped for a second. He wasn't looking at Julia now. He was looking inward, somewhere far deeper than the lights could reach. Sometimes, he continued, I wonder if I've built a prison out of kindness. Like, people love how gentle I am, how humble, how private. And somewhere along the way I stopped being allowed to be anything else. Julia shifted, her voice cautious now. Do you regret that? Keanu paused. For a long moment, no, he said. Not regret, but sometimes I miss being allowed to be messy. To say the wrong thing, to break a little, to be angry, or confused. Or ... just human. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, eyes blinking slowly. I had this teacher when I was a kid, he said suddenly. Science teacher? Mrs. Adler. No one paid attention to her. She was quiet, strict. Everyone thought she was boring. He looked up, his gaze locking onto Julia's. But she told me something once I never forgot. I was maybe 11, angry about something stupid. She found me behind the school gym, punching a locker. Didn't yell at me, didn't give me detention. She just sat next to me and said, you don't need to be liked to be seen, but you do need to be honest to be free. Keanu's voice cracked slightly, just a tremor, but it was there, I think. I forgot how to be free, he whispered. Behind the cameras, the crew stood motionless. Not because they were told to, but because they knew instinctively they were capturing something no one else had ever seen. A moment. Not a performance, not a headline, not a viral clip, just a man. Unraveling gently in real time, Julia cleared her throat, gently. Keanu ... Do you know the side camera is still recording? His head turned slightly. What? She gestured toward the far end of the room. The wide-angle camera. The one the assistant had said was running earlier. The one no one had turned off. It blinked silently. Red light still glowing. Keanu stared at it for a moment. Then back at Julia. A strange stillness filled his face, like a storm quietly deciding. Whether to break or not, he didn't move to stop it. Didn't reach for the mic on his shirt. Didn't call for a cut. Instead, he said something no one expected. Maybe it's time they saw the whole story. The producer off-screen looked up from his monitor, eyes wide. The director motioned as if to step in, but stopped frozen mid-action, because, in that moment, it became clear, this wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was a confession, and the whole world, whether they were ready or not, was about to hear it. The silence after Keanu's words wasn't silence at all. It was pressure, invisible, dense, the kind that made your heartbeat echo in your ears. Everyone in the room felt it. The producer, the camera operator, even Julia, who had conducted hundreds of interviews with presidents, actors, and philosophers, felt her breath catch in her chest. Maybe it's time they saw the whole story. The weight of that sentence hung like smoke in the air, gray, shapeless and inescapable. Keanu leaned back, slowly, his hands resting in his lap now. The coffee cup was forgotten on the side table. His shoulders weren't tense anymore. If anything, there was a kind of stillness to him now, calm, but not passive. Calm like a man who had finally stopped running, Julia sat frozen in her seat. Her fingers twitching near her notebook, unsure whether to grab it or let it go entirely. Her journalistic instincts screamed for follow-up questions, for control, but some deeper instinct told her to wait. To not interrupt this rare unraveling, Keanu's gaze drifted toward the bookshelf behind her. You know, he began softly, there are days when I feel like I'm living a life that already ended. Julia tilted her head slightly. What? Do you mean he didn't answer right away? His eyes stayed on the books. On a particular one, a worn, faded copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. It wasn't staged. It was his own copy. One he'd read so many times, the pages were nearly detached from the spine. "Grief rewires you," he said at last. "Not just emotionally, existentially. When I lost the people I loved, something inside me broke. But not in the way people think. It wasn't just sadness." His voice was steady, but low, like he was reading a secret out loud. It was clarity. The crew behind the monitors exchanged glances, unsure what to do. The camera was still recording. The audio feeds still live. Every second of this was being captured in crystal clarity. Keanu didn't seem to care. "After Jennifer, after my daughter, I stopped believing in the future." Not in a dramatic way, just quietly. Like the future became this ghost that visited other people, but not me. Julia swallowed hard. She'd read about those chapters of his life. Like the rest of the world, she knew the headlines, the tragedies, the losses. But hearing it from him now unfiltered was something else entirely. Felt sacred, painful, real. "So I started acting differently," Keanu continued. "I said yes to projects I didn't believe in. I smiled through moments where I wanted to scream. Kept telling myself, 'You're lucky. You're grateful. Just keep going.'" He finally looked back at her. "But you do that long enough, and you start to forget what your own truth even sounds like." The room was deathly quiet now. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade into the background. And then one day he said, "You're sitting in a chair like this," being asked to talk about a movie. "You realize you've said the same things 100 times, but you've never said anything." He paused, and it's terrifying. Julia leaned in. "What would you say now, if nothing had to be polished?" "What?" Keanu stared at her for a long, long moment. Then, without blinking, he began to speak. "I would say that fame is a beautiful prison. It gives you everything. And then it takes everything it didn't give. I would say that people don't love you. They love the idea of you. And if you're not careful, you start loving that idea more than yourself, because it's easier. It's safer. It never disappoints anyone." He breathed in, held it, then exhaled. "But one day, you look in the mirror and realize you don't see a man anymore. You see a ghost who smiles on cue." Julia closed her notebook slowly. This was no longer an interview. It had become something else. Something raw. Something you didn't interrupt with questions. Keanu's voice grew quieter. "I remember a moment, ... It was about 4 years ago. I was in Japan, alone, doing a press event. I just signed a poster for a fan who was crying. She kept saying how much I'd saved her life, how I was her light in the darkness, and she walked away smiling." He looked down at his hands, and I went back to the hotel room that night, and I stared out the window for hours. And I felt like a fraud, because she saw strength in me I didn't recognize anymore. She saw a lighthouse, and I was just trying not to drown. His voice broke on the last word. It wasn't loud, not dramatic, not performative. It was honest. Julia looked down, unable to meet his eyes. The crew, stunned, didn't dare stop the feed, and then a quiet alert buzzed on the producer's tablet. Someone in the tech booth had uploaded the backup feed to the cloud by accident. Autosync settings. A common error. Except this footage wasn't meant to be seen. Keanu's confession, his breakdown, his truth, and now. Somewhere on a remote server, it existed outside that room, outside his control, and soon. Someone somewhere would see it, and that's when the weight of it all finally hit. He had spoken his truth, but the world might not be ready for it, and neither was he. The storm didn't come with thunder, it came with whispers. Keanu left the room quietly after the final question. No dramatic exit. No collapse. He simply rose from the chair, nodded once to Julia, and stepped out of the frame. The cameras were still rolling, but no one dared speak. No one called cut. The silence itself felt sacred. Sacred and dangerously fragile. Behind him, the producer sat frozen, staring at the tablet in his lap. The screen still glowed. The words on it were painfully simple. Autosync complete. Interview _off_angle_raw.mov uploaded to cloud drive. It hadn't been sent to the studio yet. Not publicly shared. Yet. But it was out of the room, out of Keanu's hands. He didn't know. Not yet. In the hallway, Keanu moved like a man walking through a dream. The world around him looked the same walls, same framed art, same soft creak of the floorboards, but something in him had changed. He felt lighter, or maybe more exposed. Like he'd taken off a coat he didn't realize he'd been wearing for decades, only to discover he was shivering underneath. He stepped into the kitchen, poured the last of the coffee into his cup. It was lukewarm now. Didn't matter. He needed something familiar, something that didn't expect anything from him. He stood at the window, watching as clouds rolled across the sky. Heavy and slow, like the sky was thinking, or mourning. Behind him, the sound of cautious footsteps. Julia, she didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, not in judgment, but in protection. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was careful. You know, you said more in 40 minutes than some people say in their entire careers? Keanu turned slightly, one hand gripping the edge of the counter. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. His voice was low. I don't know if that's a good thing. She stepped closer, did an honest thing. A pause. They'll see it differently, he said. The media, the internet. He'll slice it into sound bites. Turn it into something it wasn't meant to be. Julia hesitated, and said quietly, they already might be. He blinked, turned fully to face her now. What do you mean? She stepped forward and handed him her phone. The screen was open to a message from one of her junior editors. A simple text. There's a video file syncing from your location. Unlisted, but public server. What is this? Keanu stared at the message. His mind worked faster than his body. He walked past her, down the hallway, past the camera crew who stood like statues, all eyes now avoiding him. He stepped back into the interview room. The red light on the side camera was off now, but it had been on long enough. He turned to the producer. Tell me it didn't go out. The man swallowed. It was a system thing. The off-angle feed auto-uploaded. We didn't send it. It's just there. Keanu stepped back. Just there. His story, his pain, his rawest moment, just there. A file, a feed, a fragment of his soul sitting on a server. He sat down again in the chair, the same chair from earlier, but it didn't feel the same. It felt cold now, exposed. His voice was quiet, more to himself than anyone else. They're going to tear it apart. No one corrected him. No one offered hope. Not yet. They didn't know how. Julia knelt beside him, her tone different now. Not a journalist, not a host, just a human being, she said. They're going to see you for the first time. He looked at her, eyes full of something rawer than fear, something older, more painful. Hope, and behind that hope, the weight of knowing that the world, once it sees your truth, never lets you go back to hiding. Julia stood, pulled out her phone, and placed it in his hand. I can call the editor, pull it from the server before it's found, but you have to tell me. Her voice softened. Do you want to? Keanu stared at the screen. His finger hovered over the call icon. The room was still. The world waited. And in that moment, the choice hung between who he had been, who he might finally become. The next few hours moved like water through cracked glass slow. Fractured, unstoppable. Keanu didn't make the call. Not then. He stood in the middle of the room, phone still in his hand, but he never touched the screen. Never hit cancel. Never hit confirm. He just stood there, silent, caught in the thin space between hiding and becoming. The crew packed up without a word. No one offered direction. No one dared fill the silence. The producer avoided his eyes. Julia lingered by the door, watching him with a kind of quiet reverence, like she knew this wasn't her story anymore. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Long shadows stretched across the floor, cutting through the fading light like truth. Through fiction, and somewhere far beyond the walls of Keanu's home, the file continued to exist. A quiet storm in the cloud, waiting to be found. Someone did it started small. a junior technician at the media company board, scrolling through routine uploads. He clicked on the file out of curiosity. No tags, no titles. Just a timestamp and a note, "Be camera raw, not for air." What he saw wasn't a promo clip, wasn't a blooper reel. It was Keanu Reeves, filtered, undone, and unimaginably human. He didn't share it right away. He watched it again, then again. And by the fourth viewing, he wasn't just watching, he was feeling something he hadn't expected. He sent it to one person, a friend who ran a small mental health blog. The friend watched it in full and uploaded it anonymously. No hashtags, no monetization, just the title. A man tells the truth, and no one interrupts him. Within 2 hours, the video had 30,000 views. Within 5, it passed 500,000. By sunrise, it was everywhere. Keanu hadn't slept. He sat alone on the edge of his bed, the floor lamp casting a soft circle of light behind him. The rest of the room was dark, quiet. His phone buzzed once, then again. Then a steady stream of vibration that seemed to shake the whole night. He ignored it, until he couldn't. He reached for the device and unlocked it. Dozens of texts, hundreds of missed calls, emails, notifications, people he hadn't spoken to in years. Journalists, directors, friends, strangers, and one message that stopped his breath. "You spoke for all of us. Thank you for not pretending him. No number, just the letter." He stared at it for a long time, confused. And then something inside him jolted. Mrs. Adler, his old science teacher, the woman who once told him, "You don't need to be liked to be seen, but you do need to be honest to be free." He hadn't spoken to her since he was 16, but the memory came flooding back, her voice, her quiet strength, the way she always noticed the kids no one else did. Keanu single quotes, his hands trembled slightly as he set the phone down. This wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a meltdown. It had become a movement. Comments from strangers filled the feed. "I thought I was the only one who felt this way. He's not breaking down. He's finally standing up. This isn't a celebrity moment. This is a human moment." The media scrambled to respond. Some tried to package it, label it, politicize it. But the people didn't care about categories. They cared about truth. Julia returned the next day. She didn't ask to bring cameras, didn't wear makeup. It's just jeans and a sweatshirt and a cup of coffee in a paper bag. Keanu opened the door, tired eyes meeting hers. "You okay?" she asked. He let her in, didn't answer. Just nodded once. They sat in the living room. No words exchanged for minutes. Then finally, Julia spoke. "You know, they're calling it the most honest interview ever given." He exhaled. "It wasn't an interview." She nodded. "No." Another pause. Then she reached into her bag and handed him an envelope. "A letter," she said. "Came to my office this morning. Handwritten." Keanu opened it slowly. The handwriting was familiar. "I always told you your quiet would one day speak louder than their noise." "It's time to teach again, isn't it?" Mrs. A.'s hands clenched around the paper. The moment hit him like a wave. He wasn't just seen, he was heard. Not because he tried to be inspiring. Not because he crafted a message, but because he stopped pretending. He looked up at Julia. Something new in his eyes. Something not quite peace, but close. "I think I'm ready," he said. "For what?" He smiled softly, to stop hiding. Somewhere across the world, someone else watched the video for the first time. Someone who hadn't cried in years. Someone who hadn't spoken their truth in decades. And they whispered, to no one in particular, if he can say it. 2. The world didn't explode, didn't riot, didn't burn, didn't crash. It listened, and that was somehow even more terrifying. Within 48 hours, Keanu's unscripted truth had spread like wildfire, without manipulation, without algorithms. Without clickbait, it was passed hand to hand, link to link, soul to soul. Teachers played it in classrooms. Counselors used it in group therapy. Veterans shared it in support circles. Somewhere along the way, people stopped calling it a video. They started calling it a mirror. In Keanu, he was still trying to breathe. He hadn't left his house since the upload. Not because he was hiding, but because he didn't know who the world now expected him to be. For the first time in years, there was no press statement, no publicist. Filtering reactions, no narrative to control. He'd opened the floodgates, and now the river flowed around him. The mail piled up, handwritten letters, notes on scrap paper, Polaroids from strangers holding signs that said, "Me too." They came from everywhere: kids, parents, retirees, war survivors, widows, addicts, doctors, janitors. Each letter, a wound held open too long. Finally finding air, Keanu sat on the floor of his living room, surrounded by envelopes. His fingers trembled as he opened one with no return address. "I haven't spoken to anyone in 6 months. Your voice reminded me I still exist." He stared at it. Not because it shocked him, but because it echoed exactly what he had once written in his own journal. "I disappear and no one notices. Maybe I don't either." He hadn't shared that line with anyone. And yet here it was, staring back at him through someone else's pain, and suddenly, the walls of his house didn't feel like protection anymore. They felt like hesitation. He needed to move. Not from fear, but because truth had momentum, and he could feel it rising. The invitation came on a Wednesday. A quiet email. Subject line, "Would you speak?" Sender? A youth mental health summit based in Oregon. Small, underfunded usually. Unnoticed. They had seen the video. Not the Hollywood part, just the human part. They didn't want Keanu Reeves, the actor. They wanted the man who said, "I forgot what my truth sounds like." For a while, he stared at the screen, then typed a reply, "I'll come, but only if I don't have to perform." Their answer came within minutes. "We don't need a performance. We just need a person." The auditorium was quiet when he arrived. No cameras, no spotlights, just folding chairs, hand-painted banners. Kids with anxious eyes and heavy hearts. Keanu stepped onto the stage with no script. He held a piece of paper, but not to read from it. Was one of the letters. A girl named Leela. 17, she had written. "They said I was too sensitive. Quiet, too broken. Thank you for being all of those things too." He read it aloud, and the room didn't clap. It breathed. "I'm not here as an example," Keanu said, voice steady but stripped bare. "I'm not here to inspire you. I'm here to remind you that being seen, truly seen, isn't reserved for the perfect or the loud." He paused. Let the silence sit. "I broke quietly for years. Smiled through it, worked through it, and no one noticed. Not because they were cruel, but because I never gave them the truth.
Oh.
And without the truth, no one can actually love you. They can only love the version you've sold them." A boy in the front row began to cry. No one stared at him. They let him be. Keanu stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "I don't have answers," he said. "I have memories. I have this need to tell you that being human isn't something to survive. It's something to feel." He paused again. "And then, the world teaches us to build walls. But I'm telling you, what saved me wasn't the wall. It was the one moment I let it crack." The room stayed silent. Not out of discomfort, but reverence. Something rare was unfolding. Something real. And then from the side of the stage, a woman approached slowly. Gray hair, blue sweater, eyes full of oceans. Keanu froze. "Mrs. Adler." She stepped toward him, her hand reaching for his, and whispered, "You remembered?" He nodded, throat tight. "You found me." "No," she said. "You found yourself. I was just watching." They embraced, not like student and teacher, but like two survivors who had finally come home, and for the first time in his life. Keanu didn't feel like a role or a mask or a story someone else had written. He felt like himself. And in that moment, stage lights off. The room in breathless silence, he realized something terrifying and beautiful at once. His real life was just beginning, and this time the cameras could stay on. The rain started just as Keanu stepped off the stage. Not the kind of downpour that sends people running for shelter, no. This was the quiet kind. The kind that drizzled slow and steady, like the sky itself was in no hurry. It kissed the earth with soft fingertips and left behind a glistening film like tears on skin. The air smelled like pine and wet stone, thick and clean. It was the kind of evening that felt like a reset. Keanu stood in it, face tilted upward, letting the water fall. His jacket slowly darkened at the shoulders, but he didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't run. Behind him, the Youth Summit building glowed dimly, soft laughter and hushed voices leaking out through cracked doors. Inside, something had changed. Not just for the kids who had listened. Not just for the teachers or volunteers or therapists. Something had shifted inside him too. For the first time in years, the truth wasn't just something he carried. It was something he'd given. And it didn't destroy him. It set him free. But the world hadn't stopped moving. His phone buzzed again. He finally looked. 3.1 million views, trending worldwide. He swiped through headlines. They weren't the ones he feared. They weren't calling him broken, or unstable, or fragile. They were calling him brave, actor, or oracle. Keanu's truth shakes the internet. When silence becomes revolution. But even louder than the press were the messages flooding in from strangers, people he would never meet, but somehow already knew. I haven't spoken to my father in 6 years. After your video, I wrote him. I showed it to my mom. We cried together. For the first time since my sister died, you said the thing I couldn't, and now my husband knows I'm not okay. Thank you. He read them, not with pride, but with awe. This wasn't about a moment anymore. This was a mirror being passed from one cracked heart to another. It wasn't stopping. The next morning, he woke to a phone call. Not from an agent, not from a producer, from the academy. He almost didn't answer, but something told him to. A voice calm, older, introduced herself as the head of the humanitarian committee. We're creating a new segment this year, she said, outside the awards. A moment not to celebrate art, but to honor truth. Speak. Keanu sat in silence. I'm not sure I'm the right person, he said quietly. That's exactly why you are, she replied. He hung up and sat at the edge of his bed. It's outside, the city buzzed. Helicopters above, traffic below, life continuing. And inside, something old was dissolving. He looked at his reflection in the window, barefoot, hair unkempt, eyes still puffy. From sleep, and for once he didn't see a mask. He saw a man who had finally stopped performing. A week passed, and then came the second leak. This one wasn't an accident. A former executive assistant, someone who once worked for a major studio Keanu had left quietly years ago, uploaded an old, unseen clip. Keanu in a black room. No lights, just his voice, recorded during a studio debrief. His words, unguarded, emotional. I don't care how many tickets we sell. If I can't look in the mirror without flinching, then what's the point? The clip was raw, gritty. His voice cracked halfway through. Some said it was reckless. Others said it was proof. The truth didn't start when he forgot the camera. Was on it had been trying to speak for years. And now finally it was echoing. Days later, he sat across from Julia again. Not in a studio, just at a quiet diner. 2 coffees, no cameras, no mics. They want to make a documentary, she said. Not about your films, about your honesty. Keanu stirred his coffee slowly. What if I'm done talking? Julia tilted her head. Are you? He looked at her. Not as a journalist. Not as a threat. As a witness. No, he admitted. But I don't want it to be about me. She nodded. Then don't let it be. Let it be about what happens when a man stops performing and starts feeling. He exhaled, long and slow. Then it can't just be one documentary. What then? He looked out the window at a world hungry for something real. Series, he whispered. A voice is not mine. There's Julia smiled, eyes gleaming. We'll call it Unmasked. He smiled back. But his smile wasn't clean. It trembled. It cracked. Because it was real. And maybe that was the whole point. Maybe truth doesn't come in applause or articles or stage lights. Maybe it comes when a man sits in the rain, or cries reading a stranger's letter, or finally lets go of the version of himself that the world built without his permission. Maybe the truth starts when you stop running from it. And somewhere right then, a kid with a stutter sat alone in their bedroom, watching Keanu's words play on loop. Not because they idolized him, but because they recognized him, and whispered into the quiet, "Maybe I'm not broken after all." Not dramatic, just soft, like someone had finally understood that not all truth needs to be spotlighted. Some truth, the most important kind, glows from the inside out. The seats were full, not with celebrities or critics, not with polished press passes or red carpet gowns, but with people. Real people, survivors, storytellers, artists, students, mothers, soldiers, strangers, who had spent years silenced by expectation, now finally gathered by a different kind of gravity. A quiet sign on stage read simply, "Unmasked, a night of stories." No applause, no introductions, just a single chair. Then Keanu walked out, not to perform, not to impress, to listen. He wore the same dark jacket he'd worn during that first unexpected interview. The one where he'd sat in his home, coffee in hand, and unknowingly opened the door to a wave he could no longer stop, or even wanted to. He sat, legs relaxed, one hand resting on his knee. Didn't speak first, a young woman did. She walked slowly to the stage, trembling slightly. Her name was Aya, 22, survivor of years in foster care, abuse, silence. She held no notes. She didn't need them. I never knew how to say the things inside me, until I saw you say yours. She paused, voice cracking. You taught me that the world doesn't need us to be perfect, just present. The room stayed still. No one clapped, no one moved. They felt, and one by one more followed. A father who lost his son to addiction. A transgender teen who hadn't spoken to their family in 2 years. A war vet with hands that shook every time he spoke, but who told his story anyway. And as the stories came, Keanu didn't speak. He wept, quietly, without shame, because these weren't performances. They were releases. Every story wasn't just about pain. It was about what came after pain: resilience and truth, and the sacred rebellion of choosing to still be here. And then came the final speaker, an older woman with silver hair. She needed help stepping onto the stage, but once seated, her voice was clear, firm, familiar. "Mrs. Adler?" Keanu blinked. He hadn't known she would be there. She didn't acknowledge him directly, not yet. Just looked out at the crowd and began. "I taught for 41 years. Biology, chemistry, a bit of physics. And I spent decades thinking that was enough. That if I could teach cells to divide and formulas to balance, maybe I was doing my part." She paused. "But then one day a quiet boy sat in the back of my class. He wasn't interested in formulas or frog dissections. He was interested in silence. And I realized no one had ever taught him what silence could become if it was allowed to speak." Keanu's throat closed. Mrs. Adler turned her gaze to him now. "You spoke, Keanu," and the world finally heard its own echo. The room exhaled. Keanu stood. Slowly, carefully, walked across the stage and knelt beside her. He whispered, "You saved my life and didn't even know it." "I knew," she replied, "but it wasn't time for you to know yet." After the event, the world didn't go back to normal. It didn't need to. Instead, it evolved. People began to share more, to speak. Schools created unmasked circle-safe spaces where students could talk without being corrected. Workplaces introduced emotional breaks. Strangers sent handwritten letters. Again, podcasts rose not to entertain, but to understand, in the entertainment world. It changed too. Actors spoke without scripts. Interviews became conversations. And Keanu, he left Hollywood not with bitterness, not with shame, but with peace. He still acted sometimes, but only in roles that told the truth. No more masks, no more press tours pretending everything was okay. He spent most of his time traveling, sitting in libraries, small town centers, rehab clinics, places the spotlight never reached. Listening, asking, learning, being human. He created a foundation not for profit, not for fame, just for people who needed to say the thing they'd never said before. It was called Echo House. its tagline. Say it and let the silence go. And in that, Keanu found something he never thought he'd touch again. Not applause, not admiration. Belonging. Because somewhere, sometime, someone watched his old interview still spreading across the internet like wildfire in slow motion and whispered, "Me too." And this time, the whisper wasn't afraid. It was a beginning, and that finally was the real ending.